The lawyer, a man with a smile as thin as a paper cut, slid the final document across the polished mahogany table. "Just sign here and here," he instructed, his voice slick with manufactured pleasantry. My mother's hand, adorned with gaudy gold rings bought with money I had earned, trembled with excitement as she grabbed the pen. My father, a man who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life, simply nodded and waited his turn. My brother, Daniel, leaned back in his chair, a smug grin plastered on his face. He caught my eye for a brief moment. I stood by the door, dressed in a simple black suit, holding a briefcase. He thought I was just a courier, the assistant to the anonymous buyer. He gave me a look of pure pity, a look that said, "Look at you, still a nobody, while I'm about to cash in." He had no idea. They were celebrating, laughing about the idiot developer who had offered them double the market value for our crumbling family home. They spoke of extravagant vacations, new cars, and investments for Daniel's next brilliant business idea. They were so blinded by greed, so eager to finally wash their hands of the house and its memories, specifically the memories of me, that they never once questioned the transaction. They never bothered to look into the name on the purchasing agreement, Apex Holdings LLC, a name I had chosen myself. They didn't know that the lawyer worked for me. They didn't know that the astronomical offer came from my bank account. And they certainly didn't know that with their 3 signatures, they weren't just selling a piece of property. They were handing over the final key to their own destruction. They were giving me the one thing I needed to complete my revenge. This house was the stage, and the final act was about to begin. They believed they were securing their future. In reality, they were signing their eviction notice, delivered by the son they had thrown away like trash years ago. You're probably wondering why I would go to such lengths, why a son would buy his own family home just to watch his parents sign it away. Why not just confront them? Because a simple confrontation is not justice. Justice requires a lesson. And my lesson for them started years ago, on a cold, rainy night. It started with a ride I gave to a stranger, an old woman shivering on the side of the road. And it started with what she left in my back seat, something that wasn't just forgotten, but planted, something that would give me the power to burn their world to the ground. To understand the fire, you have to understand the years of kindling they piled up around me. My life was built on a simple, unspoken rule. Daniel was the investment, and I was the resource. He was the golden child, destined for a corner office and a life of comfort. I was the workhorse, the one who was good with his hands, a phrase my mother used with a faint curl of her lip. It was her polite way of saying I was born to serve my brother's brilliant future. My earliest memories are of this division. When Daniel got a new chemistry set for his birthday, I was given a new pair of work boots because my old ones were worn through from my after-school job washing dishes. My paychecks, from the age of 16, were never mine. They went directly into the family account, a financial black hole from which my mother would fund Daniel's ambitions. It paid for his private tutors when his grades slipped, his spot on the varsity tennis team, his first car, a brand new sedan he crashed within 6 months. I remember the fight that followed, not about his recklessness, but about how I needed to pick up more shifts at the factory to cover the repairs. "It was an accident, Alex," my father had said, refusing to meet my eyes. "Your brother feels terrible. It's your duty to help him." Daniel, meanwhile, sulked in his room, complaining about the inconvenience. The ultimate promise, the carrot they dangled in front of me for 15 years, was the house. "You are the responsible one," my mother would say, patting my arm in a rare, calculated show of affection. "You keep this family afloat. One day, this house will be yours. It's the least we can do to repay your sacrifice." I clung to that promise like a drowning man to a raft. That house wasn't just brick and mortar, it was the symbol of my eventual reward, the proof that my sacrifices meant something. It was the only thing I thought I had. I believed them. I was a fool. The night I met the old woman was the night that illusion finally shattered. I was driving home late, rain lashing against my windshield, my bones aching from a 16-hour shift. The factory had demanded overtime to finish a big order. My phone had buzzed earlier with a text from my mother. Daniel needs $2,000 for a down payment on a new apartment with his girlfriend. Your check should cover it. Don't be late. Not a question, but a demand. I felt a familiar, hollow ache in my chest. I was a tool, a human ATM, and I was breaking down. It was on that dark, slick road, in the depths of my despair, that I saw her, a frail figure huddled under a bus stop, drenched and shivering. I almost drove past. God, I wish I could say it was pure altruism that made me stop. But truthfully, I think I just needed a distraction from the crushing weight of my own life. I pulled over. She opened the door, a gust of cold, damp air rushing into the car. She was smaller than I thought, a bundle of wet wool and wrinkled skin. She eased herself into the passenger seat with a soft groan, pulling a threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thank you, young man. Truly, thank you," she whispered, her voice raspy with age. I just nodded, the warmth of the heater feeling like a guilty luxury in her presence. She gave me an address in an older part of town, a place I hadn't been to in years. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds being the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers and the hiss of the tires on the wet pavement. Then she turned her head, and her eyes, surprisingly sharp and clear, fixed on me. "You're Robert's boy, aren't you?" she asked. I was so startled I almost swerved. No one in my life called my father Robert except for family, and I had never seen this woman before. "You're Alex." My heart hammered against my ribs. How do you know that?" A sad, knowing smile touched her lips. She didn't answer my question directly. Instead, she just said, "You have a good heart. It's a shame some people don't appreciate a heart like that." The words landed with a strange weight. A simple compliment from a total stranger felt more genuine than any praise I had ever received from my own parents. It was a glass of cold water in the middle of a desert, and I didn't know how to react. I pulled up to a small, tidy house with a single light glowing in the front window. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. "Please, for your trouble." I tried to refuse, but she pressed it into my hand. "Keep it," she insisted, her gaze intense. "You'll need your own money one day." Before I could process her odd statement, she was out of the car and hurrying up the walkway, disappearing into the house without a backward glance. I drove home in a daze, her words echoing in my mind. The next morning, fueled by cheap coffee and a sense of dread about the day ahead, I went to clean out my car. That's when I saw it. Tucked deep into the crevice between the passenger seat and the center console was a small, rectangular object wrapped in what looked like oilcloth. It was her purse, I thought. She must have dropped it. I unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small, worn, leather-bound book. A diary. My first instinct was to return it immediately. I opened it to the first page, looking for a name or an address. And there, written in a familiar, elegant cursive I hadn't seen since I was a child, were two words that sent a shockwave through my entire body. Eleanor Vance, my grandmother's name. My grandmother Eleanor had been dead for 12 years. I stared at her name, the elegant loops and swirls of her cursive, a ghostly image from a past I thought was buried forever. For a moment, my mind refused to work. It was impossible. A prank. A cruel coincidence? But the handwriting was hers. I knew it as well as I knew my own. I remembered it from the birthday cards she'd send, always with a crisp $10 bill tucked inside. A secret just between us. My mother would always confiscate it for the family account, but my grandmother's words, "For you, my dear Alex, buy something that makes you happy," were a treasure I kept. My hands shaking, I began to read. The entries started innocently enough, notes about her garden, complaints about the weather. But then my name began to appear. And Daniel's, and my mother's. The pages painted a picture of a truth I had felt in my bones but had never been able to prove. October 5th, one entry read, "My daughter visited today. We argued again about the boys. She sees Daniel as a prince and Alex as a pawn. I see a brilliant, kind boy being worked to the bone to fund the whims of his lazy brother. She cannot see it, or she will not." I told her again, "My will is clear. This house, my savings, they are for Alex. They are his escape route. He must have a chance to live his own life." I felt the air leave my lungs. An escape route. That's what she had wanted to give me, not a reward for servitude, but a way out. I kept reading, my blood turning to ice. The entries grew more fearful as her health declined. The last one, dated just a week before she died, was barely legible, her handwriting shaky and frail. July 22nd. "My daughter brought papers today, bank documents, she said, to organize my accounts." My eyes are so poor, and my hands tremble too much to hold the pen steady. I had to let her guide my hand. I pray I have not made a terrible mistake. The look in her eyes, it was not of a caring daughter. It was the same hungry look her father used to get. "I am giving this diary to my dearest friend, Martha. She has promised to keep it safe. If my fears are true, she will see it delivered to Alex when the time is right. He must know the truth. Martha, the old woman. It wasn't an accident, it was a promise, kept for over a decade. She had waited for the perfect moment when they were about to commit the final, ultimate betrayal by selling the house. They hadn't just let me be the family scapegoat. They had actively, cruelly, and illegally stolen my inheritance, my grandmother's last gift. The love she tried to give me, intercepted by my own mother's greed. The sadness in my heart curdled and hardened into something else, something cold, solid, and sharp. It was rage, pure, clarifying rage. In that moment, the boy who worked 16-hour shifts for a scrap of approval died, and someone else was born. I didn't storm into the living room. I didn't scream or throw the diary at their feet. The rage that filled me was not hot. It was ice cold, a glacier moving with unstoppable force. It clarified everything. My pain, my exhaustion, my feeling of worthlessness. It wasn't a personal failing. It was a cage they had built for me, and my grandmother had left me the key. Now I just had to walk out the door. I went to my small, bare room and packed a single duffel bag. I took my few sets of work clothes, the worn copy of a book my grandmother had given me, and the diary. I left everything else, the cheap furniture, the threadbare towels, anything that had been purchased with the family money I had earned. On my phone, I looked at my mother's text one last time. $2,000 for Daniel. Don't be late. I deleted the message, then I deleted her contact, then my father's, then Daniel's. With a few taps on a screen, I erased them from my life. I walked through the silent house, the air thick with their entitlement, and stepped out into the early morning light. I didn't look back. The first few years were hell, but it was a hell of my own choosing, and that made all the difference. I slept in a room that was little more than a closet, worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, and lived on instant noodles and coffee. But every dollar I earned was mine. The feeling was so new, so powerful, it was like learning to breathe after a lifetime of being held underwater. The discipline they had beaten into me became my greatest asset. While others slept, I worked. While they partied, I studied. The local library became my sanctuary. I devoured books on business, contract law, and real estate. I learned the language of power, the fine print they had used to swindle me. With my meager savings, I bought a single beat-up cargo van and started a small local delivery service. I was the owner, the dispatcher, and the only driver. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by rage and a singular purpose. My company grew. 1 van became 3. 3 became a fleet. I built a reputation for being relentless, reliable, and invisible. I named my company Apex Logistics, but I ran it through a series of shell corporations, ensuring my name was nowhere to be found. For years, I watched them from a distance, a ghost they didn't know existed. I had private investigators track their lives. I read about Daniel's flashy failures in the business pages, each one costing my parents a fortune. They mortgaged the house, they drained their accounts. They were bleeding money, all while I was building an empire. And then one day I got the call I had been waiting for. A source told me they were desperate. They were putting the house, my house, on the market. The time for waiting was over. The glacier had reached its destination. Setting the trap was methodical, like plotting a logistics route. Every step was calculated for maximum impact. I hired a lawyer named Harrison, a man known less for his ethics and more for his surgical precision in corporate warfare. In our first meeting, I placed the diary on his desk. "This is the motive," I said. "The target is the property listed within. But I don't just want to buy it, I want them to be euphoric as they give it to me." Harrison listened, a faint, predatory smile on his lips. He understood immediately. This wasn't a real estate transaction, it was a psychological operation. We established Apex Holdings LLC, a name so bland and corporate it was practically invisible. Then we made the offer. I instructed Harrison to go in at double the appraised value. An absurd number. A number designed to short-circuit logic and ignite the very greed that had fueled my family's betrayal. As I predicted, they bit hard. My investigators' reports were almost comical. My mother, drunk on her impending windfall, bragged to all her friends that a major international developer had recognized the hidden potential of their property, a potential only she and Daniel had been smart enough to see. Daniel, puffed up with unearned pride, acted as if he had personally orchestrated the deal, telling everyone he was on the verge of launching a new tech startup that would make him a household name. They were fools, celebrating their own execution, convinced it was their coronation. They never once asked who was behind Apex Holdings. Why would they? The money was all the validation they needed, but for me, taking the house wasn't enough. I had to be there. Revenge served cold is best, but revenge witnessed firsthand is sublime. I needed to see the hope drain from their eyes. I needed them to see me in the room as their world collapsed. So I arranged it with Harrison. I would be his assistant for the day, the courier carrying the final documents. I bought a simple, off-the-rack black suit, a uniform of anonymity. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I saw a ghost. I was putting on the costume of the boy they thought they knew, the boy who fetched and carried, the boy who stood silently in the background. It was the perfect camouflage. And so I stood by the door, the signed papers sitting on the mahogany table like a death warrant. My mother was beaming, her eyes already spending the money. My brother shot me another look, a mix of contempt and dismissal. The lawyer, Harrison, gathered the documents into a neat pile. He slid them into a folder, stood up, and then turned to face me. He didn't look at my parents or my brother, he looked directly at me. And in the sudden, heavy silence, he asked a question that changed everything. "Is there anything else, sir?" The word sir hung in the air, thick and unnatural. My mother's smile faltered, turning into a confused frown. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Daniel let out a short, mocking laugh. "Sir, are you talking to him?" He sneered, gesturing at me with his pen. "He just carries the bags. Don't worry, we'll make sure he gets a tip." I ignored him. I took a step forward, leaving the shadows by the door. I walked to the head of the table and stood beside Harrison. The suit no longer felt like a costume, it felt like armor. "Thank you, Harrison," I said, my voice calm and low. A register they hadn't heard from me before. "That will be all. I'll take it from here." Harrison nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mr. Vance." He handed me the folder containing the signed deeds and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Mr. Vance. The name hit them like a physical blow. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Mr. Vance, Alex, what is this absurd game? She demanded, her voice sharp with panic. What did you do? Daniel snarled, rising slightly from his seat. Did you try to sabotage our deal? After everything we did for you, you ungrateful… I held up a hand. The gesture was small, but it carried a weight that silenced him instantly. The power in the room had shifted, and they all felt it. Please, sit down, Daniel, I said. It wasn't a request. I turned my gaze to my mother, whose face had gone pale. There is no game, and the deal is not sabotaged. It's complete. I tapped the folder. The house is sold. I let the statement hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final blow. The only slight misunderstanding, I continued, my voice devoid of all emotion, is that you seem to believe you sold it to a stranger. I paused, meeting each of their horrified stares. You didn't. You sold it to me. For a second, there was only stunned silence, then a torrent of denial. You're lying, my mother shrieked. That's impossible. You're a nobody. You have nothing. Instead of arguing, I reached into the briefcase I had placed on the floor beside me. It wasn't for the lawyer's papers. It was for mine. I didn't pull out bank statements or corporate documents. I pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound book. I walked around the table and placed it gently on the polished wood, directly in front of my mother. Her eyes widened in recognition. The colour drained from her face. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Before we discuss the details of your eviction, I said softly, I think we need to talk about my grandmother and what you stole from her and from me. My mother stared at the diary as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table. All the colour had drained from her face, replaced by a blotchy, mottled panic. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. For the first time in my life, I saw her without her armour of maternal authority and condescension. She was just a cornered woman, stripped bare by a truth she thought she had buried 12 years ago. You recognise it, don't you? I said, my voice cutting through the suffocating silence. I didn't need an answer. I picked up the book and opened it to a page I had marked long ago. Let me remind you of what's inside. July 22nd. Grandmother Eleanor's words, not mine. I looked directly at her. My daughter brought papers today, bank documents, she said. I had to let her guide my hand. I pray I have not made a terrible mistake. I closed the book with a soft thud. A terrible mistake. She knew. Even then she knew you. She knew what you were. I then turned my gaze to my father, who was staring at his hands, and to Daniel, whose face was a mask of confusion and dawning horror. And what about you two? Did you ever wonder why her estate was suddenly so much larger than expected? Why the will that was filed looked nothing like the one she'd talked about for years? Or was it just easier not to ask questions while you were spending Daniel's stolen inheritance on his private schools and sports cars? Daniel flinched as if I'd struck him. Stolen? He whispered, looking at our mother. What is he talking about? He's lying. He's twisting things, my mother finally shrieked, finding her voice. It was thin and reedy, devoid of its usual power. Am I? I asked calmly. This diary, her last will and testament, says otherwise. You built this life, Daniel's life, on a foundation of fraud. You funded his failures with the money that was meant to be my freedom. And when that money ran out, when his latest genius idea collapsed and left you bankrupt, you decided to sell the one remaining piece of your crime. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. There's a beautiful but terrible poetry in that, don't you think? The very asset you stole is what brought you here, to this table, to face me. I stood up straight, the meeting over as far as I was concerned. The boy they had raised was gone. The man standing before them was a stranger, an executor of a will long ignored. My grandmother wanted me to have this house as an escape route. It took me more than a decade, But I am finally honoring her wish. This is my house now. I looked at each of them one last time, my expression as hard and unyielding as granite. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. My lawyer will serve you the official eviction papers tomorrow. The words 30 days detonated in the silent room. The shockwave hit them all at once. My mother was the first to break. A raw animal wail escaped her lips. "No!" she cried, staggering to her feet. "Alex, you can't do this to us. I'm your mother. This is your family. Where will we go? What will we do?" She lunged toward me, her hands outstretched, not in anger, but in a desperate, grasping plea. I took a step back out of her reach. "You forfeited the right to call yourself my mother the day you decided my inheritance would look better in Daniel's bank account," I said, my voice as level as a frozen lake. "As for where you will go, that is no longer my concern. You are resourceful. I'm sure you'll think of something." My father, finally stirring from his stupor, tried to play the peacemaker, a role he had perfected through years of enabling. "Son, listen, let's not be hasty. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Your mother, she was only trying to protect the family's assets." "Protect them from whom? The person they rightfully belong to." I cut him off, my gaze sharp enough to make him recoil. "The time for discussion was 12 years ago, when you stood by and watched this happen. Your silence was your signature on her crime." "You have nothing to say that I want to hear." Then came Daniel. His arrogance, his life's defining feature, shattered into a million pieces. He fell apart completely. He stumbled around the table and grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly weak. "Alex, please," he whimpered, tears streaming down his face. He looked pathetic. "Don't do this. My business partners, my reputation, I'll be ruined, I'll have nothing." I looked down at his hand on my sleeve with utter contempt, then met his eyes. "You already have nothing, Daniel," I said softly. "You've had nothing your entire life. Everything you are, everything you've ever had, was a lie funded by theft. You're not losing a fortune. You're simply returning to your natural state, zero. You've finally earned exactly what you deserve." I pulled my arm free from his grasp. I looked at the three of them, a tableau of ruin and self-pity. My mother sobbing hysterically. My father pale and trembling. My brother, a broken man-child on the verge of collapse. There was no pity in my heart. There was only a vast, quiet emptiness where the pain used to be. 30 days, I repeated, turning my back on them for the last time. I walked out of the dining room and closed the doors behind me, shutting out the sound of their imploding world. I stood alone in the hallway of my house, my grandmother's house. And for the first time since I was a child, I felt the beginnings of peace.